Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a deep theological lecture, starting with a wild biological fact.
Get this. Our eyes only see about 5% of the light spectrum. We completely miss the rest. Our hearing has limits too. Without a 20 decibel lower threshold, you'd literally hear the earth rotating. Crazy, right? Without these limits, hearing microscopic life on your pillow would drive you insane. It's a biological mercy. The speaker argues that truly understanding something requires limits. Erasing those boundaries causes a modern crisis of values. So limitlessness just creates chaotic valuelessness. True understanding that absolutely demands drawing clear, definitive lines. Take this famous quote. It shows revelation isn't some rigid encyclopedia, but the ultimate source of principles. The Quran doesn't give infinite rules. It gives limited formulas designed to solve literally boundless human problems. Strict concepts get redefined here, like qisas. It's not just punishment, it's justice that breathes life into society. Values demand a supreme reference point. Without it, we're just living to live. Our goals become totally empty. Shifting to spiritual realities makes you wonder, if good deeds actually had a scent, how would they smell? That ultimate reference point is Allah. It's described as the absolute heart of the divine names. See the difference? Names like the Merciful are attributes. Allah is the central subject they all serve. Imagine a giant rosary made of 400 billion galaxies. Now ask yourself, who is holding the string? To really grasp this, we have to dive into the perfectly preserved three-letter roots of ancient Arabic. Mixing these root letters reveals an emotional progression. It moves from initial fear all the way to devotion. It starts with havela. It's a deep fear of the unknown. We freeze before a terrifying, majestic source. It's kind of like the Atat desert snake. It's so hypnotically beautiful that its prey just freezes in awe. But that awe transforms. The terror turns into deep fascination, and eventually that blossoms into pure love. So linguistically, the root of this divine worship isn't just terror. It's ultimately anchored in secret love. Limits create meaning, and awe leads to love. How will you limit yourself to find infinite meaning today?
Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. If you've ever felt completely overwhelmed by a modern world that just seems to have lost all its boundaries, well, you're definitely not alone. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating lecture by thinker and author Mustafa İslamoğlu. We're going to take a truly captivating journey, starting with the chaos and anxiety of modern society. And then we'll embark on this deep linguistic dive into ancient Arabic roots to uncover the hidden architecture of meaning itself.
So let's dive right in with a massive question about the modern condition. What actually happens to us humans when absolutely everything becomes limitless? We so often equate having zero boundaries with ultimate freedom. But the source material challenges this directly, suggesting that an absolute lack of boundaries actually creates a deep, paralyzing anxiety. It really asks us to consider the void that forms when we just dismantle all structures.
Part 1. Değerler krizi ve sınırsızlık, which translates to the crisis of values and limitlessness. You see, when traditions and cultural structures are stripped away, even the flawed ones, mind you, and they aren't replaced with higher, grounded principles, society falls into a pretty dangerous state of valuelessness. Again, we like to equate that zero-boundary state with ultimate freedom, but the source material directly challenges this. Meaning actually requires boundaries. The argument here is that the worst value is still better than absolute valuelessness. Without lines drawn around what is good, bad, beautiful, or ugly, words lose their weight entirely, and we plunge into this anxious void where nothing can be truly understood. Moving on to part 2. Anlamak için sınırlar şarttır. Limits are essential for understanding. And this need for boundaries, it's not just some abstract, philosophical idea. It's literally hardwired into our biology. I mean, limits are basically a biological mercy. Take our sight, for example. Our eyes only see a very, very narrow band of light. Over 95% of the light spectrum, like infrared and ultraviolet, is completely invisible to us. Imagine if you could see 100% of the light spectrum. You'd be seeing X-rays of the people standing right in front of you. Or consider our hearing, which has a strict decibel limit. If our hearing didn't have an upper limit, the sheer deafening roar of the earth rotating on its axis would drive us completely mad. In fact, if we didn't have a lower limit, we'd be kept awake all night listening to the microscopic mites crawling on our pillows. Our biology survives precisely because it is wonderfully, mercifully limited.
All right, part 3. Vahiy evrensel çözüm formülleri, or Revelation Universal Solution Formulas.
So divine texts, like the Quran, they don't actually give us this exhausting, infinite list of answers for every single micro-scenario you might face in life. Instead, they provide perfect, limited formulas. The source uses this fascinating historical anecdote about Heze Ebu Bakir, who famously said that if he lost his camel's halter, he would look for it in the Quran. Now, the speaker clarifies, this doesn't mean the literal GPS coordinates of the camel are printed in the book. It means the revelation gives you the foundational principles, the mental clarity, and the logical formulas required to solve that specific problem and 1,000 others just like it. And these formulas profoundly reframe how we understand boundaries. Take the concept of qisas, for instance. It's often simply translated as retaliation, and honestly, it's heavily misunderstood. The source highlights that the verses discussing this actually emphasize forgiveness and mercy right alongside it. Rather than being a mandate for brutal punishment, it is presented as a boundary, a strict formula for absolute justice. And it's within this strict boundary of justice, the text argues, that society actually finds life and safety, rather than getting stuck in endless cycles of revenge. Which brings us to part 4, Esmaul Husnanun Kalbi, the heart of the beautiful names. Now, in Islamic theology, there are 99 beautiful names representing the attributes of the divine, but they all orbit one absolute center. But before we name it, we kind of have to understand why we even need it. Without a higher reference point, human actions just become this empty loop, a tautology. You ask someone, why do you eat? And they say, to live. Well, why do you live? Just to live. It's a closed, ultimately meaningless circle. But when there is an ultimate reference point, when eating and living are framed as acts of devotion to something higher, the loop breaks open into actual purpose. Understanding this ultimate reference fundamentally removes our crippling grief for the past and our paralyzing fear of the future. To really grasp the sheer scale of this ultimate reference point, the speaker asks us to do a little visualization. Imagine the observable universe holding roughly 400 billion galaxies. Let that sink in, 400 billion, and each one of those contains hundreds of billions of stars and solar systems. The speaker beautifully compares these 400 billion galaxies to the beads of a grand cosmic rosary. Looking at the totally unfathomable vastness of this holographic universe, it prompts a breathtaking question. Whose hand is powerful enough to turn the beads of a cosmic rosary that massive? Let's head into part 5, İsmin köklerindeki sevgi sırrı, the secret of love in the roots of the name. To answer that breathtaking question, the speaker basically treats the ancient Arabic roots of the word Allah, the name of that ultimate reference point, like a historical puzzle. You know, classical Arabic is highly conservative, so it preserves these root meanings from ancient desert life. It starts with the root havale. This reveals a profound sense of phobia and awe toward an unknown, overwhelming power. Imagine the absolute terror of the dark desert night. It's a fear stemming from a source you can't entirely comprehend, naturally inspiring a really deep, trembling respect. But then, the linguistic root shifts in a fascinating way. With lahave, that initial pure fear transitions into an inescapable feeling of attraction. It means to be completely mesmerized by something, to desire it deeply, to be totally occupied by it, and to feel genuine love. And that builds right into velea, which signifies an almost maddening level of overwhelming attachment. It's the kind of intense love and joy that fills you up so completely, it literally feels like a physical wind sweeping through your chest. Then we have the next root, hale, which adds a striking visual layer to our puzzle. It originally referred to the mesmerizing, shivering halo of light around the moon. It represents a captivating beauty and hope that is so magnetic, you simply cannot look away from it. So all that awe of the terrifying unknown we started with, it's now completely resolved into a feeling of absolute warmth. This is ehele, which is actually where we get the word al, or family. It is the ultimate safe harbor, the sanctuary where you are basically told, welcome, you are completely safe here. And finally, we reach elehe. When you combine the breathtaking awe, the mesmerizing beauty, and that ultimate safety, you get a state of worship. But, as the speaker points out, it is a submission driven entirely by pure, overwhelming love, not terror. And so we see the magnificent synthesis in the name Allah. The speaker asserts that this name sits at the very center of the universe, perfectly balancing majestic, trembling fear with an all-encompassing ultimate love. It's the heart of all values, the grand reference point from which all the other beautiful names, like the merciful or the knowing, just radiate.
Which brings us to the end of our journey today. The source argues that finding this ultimate focal point of love and awe might just be the absolute perfect cure for our modern crisis of meaning, finally breaking those empty tautologies we trap ourselves in. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I want to leave you with this to ponder. If understanding these profound linguistic and spiritual boundaries can cure the anxiety of a limitless world, how might you reframe the boundaries in your own life to find deeper meaning? Until next time, keep questioning and keep learning.
Have you ever really thought about how terrifying it would be if you could actually hear the Earth spinning?
Oh, wow. Yeah, just the sheer volume of it.
Right. I mean, we're sitting here right now and you're listening to this deep dive and it all feels perfectly still, just totally quiet. But we are on this colossal rock hurtling through the vacuum of space, right? Spinning at roughly 1,000 miles an hour at the equator.
Yeah, 1,000 miles an hour. It's massive.
And it is completely blissfully silent. But what if it wasn't? What if your ears didn't have a biological limit and you could actually hear the massive, grinding, roaring physics of the planet turning?
I mean, it would be absolute unadulterated madness. Your brain would just shatter under the weight of that cosmic noise.
Right, because it wouldn't just be a hum.
No, think about the friction of the entire atmosphere tearing against the vacuum of space, or, the tectonic plates grinding beneath the crust. We like to think of our senses as these open windows that connect us to the universe.
Yeah, like we're just taking it all in.
Exactly, but in reality, they are heavy, soundproof doors, they're filters, they actually protect us by shutting almost everything out. And this idea that limitation is actually a profound mercy, that we only survive because we are restricted, is really the foundational concept we are exploring today.
That is just such a terrifying but amazing thought, that our senses are actually, a biological shield protecting us from the deafening noise of reality. And that's just the starting point of an incredible journey we're taking in this deep dive.
It really is just the beginning.
We've been looking deeply into the notes and transcripts from these fascinating lectures by a thinker named Mustafa İslamoğlu, and the mission here is huge. We're trying to understand the deep structural meaning behind the concept of Allah.
Yeah, and to do that, we aren't just going to, quote theology at you for an hour.
No, not at all. We are going into human biology, ancient desert linguistics, psychology, and even astrophysics.
Because this isn't just an exercise in memorizing religious trivia. It's an exploration of how human beings actually navigate existence itself. How do we build values when the world feels totally chaotic? How do we construct language to explain things that seem, entirely unexplainable?
Right, and we're going to span from the microscopic limits of human senses, like the exact number of decibels your ear can process, all the way out to the cosmic scale of hundreds of billions of galaxies.
And we're tying it all together by looking at the human search for an ultimate reference point in life.
So let's start with a metaphor about being lost.
Yeah.
Because how do you find your way when you lose something vital? There's this really striking historical anecdote from the source material about Abu Bakr.
Right, one of the closest companions of the Prophet Muhammad.
Yeah, and he was known as a deeply pragmatic, really grounded individual.
Yeah.
But he once made a claim that sounds entirely counterintuitive to a modern ear. He said that if he lost his camel's halter, just a simple physical rope used to guide the animal, he would look for it in the divine revelation, in the Wahi.
Which, if you take that literally, it sounds completely absurd.
Yeah, I mean, if I lose my car keys today, I don't open up a spiritual text expecting to find the GPS coordinates printed in the margins, right?
Exactly. And Abu Bakr wasn't doing that either. He wasn't looking for a specific verse saying, your camel's halter is buried behind the third sand dune on the left.
Right, obviously not.
He was laying down a fundamental philosophy about what revelation actually does to the human brain. He was arguing that the divine text doesn't give you a map of the world. It gives you the operating system for your mind.
An operating system. That makes so much sense. It establishes the ultimate principles on which human logic should operate.
Right, because if you lose something in the desert, panic is your absolute worst enemy. You die if you panic.
Yeah, you just run around wasting energy.
Exactly. So the revelation teaches you how to maintain your composure, how to suppress your ego's instinct to just thrash around blindly. It teaches you how to logically retrace your steps and how to deduce where that lost item might be. It's the difference between being handed a list of specific solutions versus being handed a master formula.
Oh, I like that. Formulas versus solutions.
Yeah, the divine revelation doesn't provide unlimited solutions to the infinite number of specific problems you will face in life. Instead, it provides a very limited number of formulas. But a single, well-understood formula can solve 1,000 different problems.
It's like the difference between someone handing you a fish versus teaching you how to build a fishing rod from scratch.
That's a perfect analogy.
Or like, it's the difference between memorizing the exact route to the grocery store and actually understanding the grid system of a city.
Yeah.
If I only memorize the route, like take a left on Main or right on Oak the moment there's construction or a detour, I'm completely lost. The solution totally fails.
Yep, you're stuck.
But if I understand the grid, if I know that avenues run north-south and streets run east-west, you can drop me anywhere, block any road, and I will find my way. The formula survives the chaos.
Exactly. The formula scales.
But wait, if we apply that to the physical text of the Quran, we're talking about a book that is bounded by 2 covers, right? It contains roughly 6,200 verses, and it was revealed 1,400 years ago in a relatively isolated desert society.
Right.
So how does a finite text with a limited word count survive the explosive evolution of human complexity? I mean, we have artificial intelligence now, we have algorithm trading, global pandemics, nuclear proliferation. How does a limited ancient text deal with unlimited modern chaos?
And that right there is the core paradox of any foundational text. How does the finite govern the infinite?
Yeah, how did it?
The answer lies in what those formulas are actually targeting. They don't address the superficial technology of the era, they address the root mechanics of the human heart and mind.
Oh, I see.
Because human technology changes rapidly, but human nature, our ego, our fears, our underlying desires, our capacity for immense cruelty, and our capacity for profound love that has remained functionally identical for thousands of years.
So we are essentially running the same psychological hardware as the people in ancient Babylon. We just have nicer screens to look at.
That is exactly it. A limited set of verses doesn't tell you how to write the code for a machine learning algorithm. It tells you how to ensure the person writing that code retains their humanity. It provides the ethical guardrails.
Right.
Think about how difficult it is to change human behavior. We struggle to change our own minor habits, biting our nails, eating too much sugar. We can barely get our kids to make their beds.
Don't remind me.
Right. Yet the principles within this limited revelation have historically grabbed grown, stubborn, hardened adults and fundamentally rewired their entire value system. It shifted them from a state of chaotic selfishness to a state of disciplined empathy. And it achieved that by establishing absolute boundaries.
And that concept of boundaries is exactly where things start to get really fascinating in the source material, because human beings inherently despise boundaries. We hate being told what we can and cannot do.
We really do. We want to be totally free.
We have this romanticized view of being limitless. But when you look at the human body, when you look at our biology, we desperately, fundamentally rely on boundaries just to stay sane.
We do. And the phrase from the text we really need to anchor ourselves to here is, to understand is to limit. Anlamak sınırlamaktır.
To understand is to limit.
Yes. If you want to comprehend anything in this world, you have to draw a boundary around it. If you try to perceive everything all at once, you process nothing. It's just white noise. And this isn't just some philosophical musing. It is a hard-coded biological reality. Your 5 senses only function because they are severely, almost aggressively restricted.
Let's talk about our eyes, because the data from the text on this is mind-blowing. We walk around completely convinced that we are seeing reality exactly as it is. But our eyes only perceive an incredibly tiny, highly restricted band of the electromagnetic spectrum.
It's remarkably small.
We see less than 5% of the actual light spectrum. We miss 95%. We are completely blind to ultraviolet light. We can't see infrared. We can't see microwaves or radio waves.
And thank goodness we can't. Think about the pop culture fantasy of having X-ray vision. We always frame it as this ultimate biological upgrade, right? Like you'd be a superhero.
Oh yeah, you'd see through walls. It'd be amazing.
But the source material argues that if the upper boundary of your visual spectrum was actually removed in real life, it would be a waking nightmare.
Because you wouldn't just be looking through walls. You'd look at your spouse or your kids across the dinner table.
Yes. You wouldn't see their faces, you wouldn't see their smiles or those subtle micro-expressions that tell you they're happy or sad. You would see their skeletal structure. You would see their internal organs pulsing, their blood pumping through their veins.
Oh man, that is horrifying.
It is. The emotional connection you have with a human face relies entirely on the fact that your vision stops at the surface of the skin. The biological boundary of our vision is what allows us to see beauty. It allows intimacy. Without that limit, human connection breaks down into raw clinical anatomy.
Wow. And the auditory limits are arguably even more terrifying because our hearing is capped at a lower threshold of about 20 decibels. Sounds below that simply don't register to the human brain.
Right.
And if they did, if that boundary was removed and you could hear the microscopic world, you would go completely insane, literally. The text points out there are roughly 2 billion microbiological creatures, like dust mites and microscopic organisms, moving around on your pillow, in your eyelashes, and on your lips at any given moment.
Just imagine trying to fall asleep with that. The room is perfectly dark and quiet to us now, but to your limitless ears, it would sound like a packed stadium.
A stadium made of bugs.
Exactly. The deafening sound of 2 billion microscopic bugs crawling, eating, and shifting right next to your eardrum. Your brain would be completely overwhelmed by the acoustic data, and the text actually mentions a tragic, real-world example of this.
Right, the woman from 50 years ago.
Yeah, there was a woman who developed a rare neurological condition that caused hypersensitive hearing. Her auditory boundaries effectively collapsed. She could hear the faintest vibrations, the hum of electricity in wires miles away, the ambient rumble of the entire environment.
And she just went mad.
She went entirely mad. Her brain simply could not process the infinite noise of the world. The boundary breaking broke her mind.
Even our sense of smell is heavily filtered. A normal person can distinguish maybe 300 to 400 distinct smells. But there are individuals, these 1 in a billion super smellers, who can distinguish 4,000 to 5,000 different scents. They're highly sought after in the perfume industry, making absolute fortunes because they can detect notes the rest of us are completely blind to.
Right, they have a slightly wider boundary.
But if you take that biological fact and spin it into a philosophical question like the text does, you get something deeply unsettling. What if moral failures? What if sins had a smell?
That's a brilliant thought experiment. If the boundary between the physical and the moral broke down and every lie or cruelty emitted a scent, society would collapse. We couldn't share elevators or sit in offices with one another.
We'd all be suffocated by it.
Exactly. So the overarching takeaway here is undeniable. Biological boundaries are not a prison. They are a profound mercy. Without physical boundaries, our sensory organs would overload and our brains would short circuit. We would be paralyzed by the infinite, unfiltered data of the universe.
So, okay, we established that physical boundaries keep our physical brains intact. But how did that translate to the rest of human experience? Because it seems like conceptual boundaries, moral values, ethics, definitions of right and wrong do the exact same thing for society.
They absolutely do.
Without moral boundaries, doesn't society essentially suffer the equivalent of that auditory madness?
That is precisely the transition the source material makes, stepping from biology into morality. When a society decides to remove all its ethical X-ray filters and its moral decibel limits, you enter a massive crisis of values.
Right.
The text brings up a really heavy example to illustrate this, the Marden tragedy. Now, for the listener, we are going to look at this strictly through the philosophical lens intended by the text, entirely bypassing the modern political sides or blame games that usually surround these events.
Yeah, we are just imparting the ideas from the source material here, not endorsing any political viewpoint.
Yeah. Exactly. The crucial point made by the speaker in the text is a heavy critique of how we analyze horrific societal violence. Because the intellectual reflex is usually to blame it on things like backward traditions or feudalism.
But the text argues that blaming tradition is actually a massive cop-out. It misses the deeper, much more dangerous rot underneath the violence.
It does. The real culprit is the total collapse of values. It's a state of deserseislik, which means absolute valuelessness. Let's look at the concept of a primitive belief system to understand this. Imagine a society that worships a literal rock in the center of their village.
Okay, a rock.
From an outside modern perspective, it is a profoundly flawed primitive system. But even worshiping a stone provides some kind of structural boundary. The believer says, "The stone commands me not to steal from my neighbor." A line has been drawn in the sand.
It's an arbitrary line, but it's a line.
Exactly. but total valuelessness, stripping away all sacredness, all tradition, all belief, and anything higher than the immediate self. That leaves humanity completely unmoored.
Because when there is no line drawn anywhere,
Yeah.
human beings are capable of boundless cruelty.
Yes. The worst, most flawed value system still provides a framework. The absolute void of valuelessness is the societal equivalent of hearing those 2 billion microbes. It's just chaotic, destructive noise where the strong devour the weak without a second thought.
So to illustrate how these necessary conceptual boundaries work in practice, the text looks at how we define justice. And there's a concept in Islamic jurisprudence that is universally misunderstood, which is qisas.
Oh, heavily misunderstood.
When people hear qisas, they immediately translate it to retaliation. In the law of equal punishment, an eye for an eye, it's viewed purely as a harsh, draconian penal code.
Right, that's the common assumption.
But when you actually read the verses detailing qisas, there is a massive glaring paradox that most people miss entirely. How could it be purely about punishment if the exact same verses heavily feature the concepts of forgiveness, mercy, and pardon?
Right. If qisas is purely a cold-blooded legal code about enacting harsh punishment, how do we explain the fact that the verse simultaneously encourages pardoning the offender? It makes absolutely no sense if you view it purely as a penal code.
Yeah, a penal code doesn't say, here is the punishment, but also it would be really great if you just let it go.
Exactly, which tells us that qisas is not fundamentally about punishment. The text synthesizes this beautifully. It is fundamentally about justice, the Arabic concept of adalat. Punishment is just one potential mechanism to achieve justice. Forgiveness is another, often preferred, mechanism. But the ultimate non-negotiable goal is the restoration of balance. The text quotes a famous phrase, "In qisas, there is life for you. In justice, there is life."
In justice, there is life.
If a society fails to enforce a boundary, if it fails to say, this specific action crosses the line, destabilizes the community, and demands a rebalancing, then oppression spreads like a virus. And in oppression, there is death. Qisas is the conceptual boundary that keeps the social organism alive.
Okay, wait, I have to push back here. Or at least ask the obvious question. If we say society needs boundaries to survive, who actually gets to draw those lines? If boundaries define what is good, bad, beautiful, and ugly, and society decides those boundaries, aren't we trapped in a cycle? If a corrupted society sets the boundaries, aren't we just hard-coding oppression and calling it justice?
That is the ultimate question. You've just identified the greatest philosophical trap in human history. The text refers to it as the tautology of life.
The tautology of life.
Yeah. A tautology, in logic, is a circular argument that ultimately means absolutely nothing. It proves itself using itself. Let me give you the simplest example from the lectures. If you ask a man walking down the street, "Why do you eat?" he will look at you like you're crazy and say, "To live, obviously."
Naturally.
But if you ask him, "Okay, but why do you live?" If he strips away all the poetry and gets down to the mechanical truth of his day-to-day existence, he might eventually realize the answer is to eat.
Oh, wow. You wake up to go to work, to make money, to buy food, to give you the energy to wake up, to go to work. It's the modern existential crisis. It's a closed loop.
Exactly. And inside a closed loop, meaning suffocates. If a value system only references itself, it's meaningless. If society decides what is good purely based on what society currently wants, good has no anchor. It just drifts with the wind. The only way to break that meaningless, suffocating loop is to introduce a transcendent reference point. You need something outside the system to give the system scale and direction.
And this is where the text introduces the concept of ubudi, or worship.
Yes. If you eat to sustain your body, not just to survive another day on the treadmill, but to serve a higher transcendent purpose, to serve the ultimate reality, then the intensely mundane act of eating is suddenly transformed.
It breaks out of the loop.
It becomes an act of meaning. The transcendent reference point is what gives the boundary its legitimacy. You aren't just following society's rules, you are aligning with the absolute.
Which brings us to the core of this entire exploration. The ultimate transcendent reference point that breaks us out of the meaningless loop is this concept of Allah. But knowing a word is very different from understanding the reality behind it. You can know the word ocean, but until you've nearly drowned in it or felt the terrifying weight of the water, you don't really understand the ocean.
That's a great way to put it.
We're talking about Ma'rifatullah truly understanding the divine, not just knowing of it.
And the text outlines that the psychological payoff of reaching Ma'rifatullah is staggering. This isn't about passing a theology exam or winning a philosophical debate. When a person truly reaches this level of understanding, they experience a radical shift in their moment-to-moment psychology. They feel no grief over the past. They feel no anxiety over the future. And they experience no event in their life as a surprise.
Okay, I have to stop you there. No surprises, no anxiety. That sounds completely impossible for a human being living in the real world.
It does sound like a stretch, right?
Yeah, I mean, if I lose my job tomorrow, or if someone rear-ends my car in traffic, I'm going to be surprised and I'm going to be anxious. How does this theoretical understanding actually prevent that?
It works through the alignment of will. In the philosophical framework the text uses, there is the kuzi arrayed your limited individual human will. It's your desire for the traffic light to turn green, your desire to keep your job, your desire for comfort.
Okay, my personal wants.
And then there's the kuli arrayed the universal, absolute, divine will.
The macro script of the universe.
Exactly. Anxiety and grief occur in the friction between those two wills. You suffer when you demand that the kuli arrayed bend to your kuzi arrayed. You want the universe to adapt to your schedule. But when you achieve Marafatullah, you realize that the ultimate reference point is operating with infinite wisdom. Your individual will locks into the universal will.
So when I get fired from my job, I don't see it as the universe attacking me.
Right. You realize that everything is a teacher. Every event is a deliberate lesson in the curriculum of your life. You stop fighting the current of reality and start reading it. When you actively want what the ultimate reality wants for you, even if it's difficult in the moment, how can you ever be surprised or anxious? You are in a profound state of flow.
Okay, so to help the limited human mind grasp that ultimate reality and reach that state of flow, we rely on the Esmaul Husna, the 99 beautiful names. But how do these names actually function? Because naming the infinite seems like a contradiction in itself.
It is a bit of a paradox.
Yeah.
Think of the 99 names as an anatomy. The text uses this great analogy. If all the names make up the limbs, the face, the hands, and the nervous system of a body, the name Allah is the beating heart.
The heart.
Yes. In Arabic grammar, there is the mebsuf, the core subject, the pure essence being described, and the sifat, the adjectives describing it.
So names like the merciful, the forgiving, the knowing, these are the limbs.
Yes. They are adjectives. They are how the transcendent essence interacts with our limited human reality. We can't comprehend the pure essence of the heart, so we interact with the hands of mercy and the eyes of knowledge. But all those adjectives derive their lifeblood, their absolute meaning from that central heart, the mebsuf.
And there is a massive effort in the text to protect that pure essence, that heart, from our human tendency to drag things down to our mortal level. We constantly try to anthropomorphize the divine. We want to make it like us.
We do. We really do.
There is this fascinating breakdown of Surah Al-Ikhlas, which is one of the shortest but most foundational chapters in the Quran. It contains the phrase lem yelid, which is usually translated simply as he neither begets.
Right. And the interpretation of lem yelid highlighted here is razor sharp. It argues that this isn't just a statement about family trees. It is a direct philosophical rejection of assigning fatherhood to God. Why is rejecting fatherhood so crucial? Because biological reproduction is inherently a mechanism of mortality.
We reproduce because we die.
Exactly. We have children to pass on our legacy, to continue our genetic line because our physical bodies have expiration dates. To say God begets is to force a biological mortal limitation onto the limitless. Lem Yelid acts as an absolute firewall, protecting the concept of the divine from being infected by human biological boundaries. It preserves the transcendence.
Okay, I want to try something here, because the physical mechanics of this are incredible. Let's look at how the word Allah is actually pronounced in Arabic. Just the physical act of saying it, as described in the text.
Oh, this is one of my favorite parts.
I say it slowly, Allah. The first sound, the A, starts at the very outermost edge of my physical being. It starts right at the lips.
At the front.
Then as I move to the L sound, my tongue moves backwards, striking the middle of the palate. And then the final sound, the Ha, in Ah. I literally have to push air from deep down in my chest, from my lungs. The pronunciation travels backward and downward.
It is a literal physical map. The linguistic structure of the word itself forces your body to take a journey. It starts at the boundary of your interaction with the outside world, your lips, and it moves progressively inward, ending in your core, your breath.
It's directing the human being inward to find the divine.
Yes. The text points out that the divine is closer to you than your jugular vein. If the ultimate reality is that intimately close, you don't find it by building a rocket ship and traveling outward into the cold vacuum of space. You find it by traveling inward. You have to escape the boundary of your own ego, the ben, or the I. The very pronunciation of the word is a physical rehearsal for the spiritual act of looking inward.
But if this essence, this Allah, is the heart of reality, how did a group of ancient desert-dwelling people manage to encode that massive cosmic idea into a single spoken word without it getting corrupted over centuries? How does a language preserve that kind of mathematical depth?
To understand that, we have to look at the very building blocks of the Arabic language itself. It acts as a linguistic time capsule. Unlike English or other modern languages that constantly morph, borrow, and dilute their vocabulary over centuries, Arabic preserves a highly structured, almost mathematical core known as the three-letter root system, or sulasi musaretler.
Right.
Almost every word in the language can be stripped down to three foundational consonants.
And the ancient Arabs were obsessed with protecting this system. There's this incredible historical tidbit from the text about how they maintained linguistic purity. The wealthy Arabs living in bustling cities like Mecca didn't raise their own infants.
No, I didn't.
They would send their newborn children away to live with wet nurses deep in the harsh, unforgiving desert. We usually assume this was a health measure, like getting the kids away from the disease and squalor of city life. But the primary reason was actually linguistic.
It was a hardcore linguistic kindergarten. The cities were melting pots. Traders were coming in from the Byzantine Empire, from Persia, bringing foreign slang and mispronunciations.
It was diluting the language.
Exactly. The desert tribes, however, were isolated. Their language remained pure, uncorrupted, perfectly preserving the ancient root system. They sent their children to the desert not just for fresh air, but to download the pure, uncorrupted operating system of the Arabic language.
Which shows how phenomenally high the stakes were for linguistic precision. And this obsession with precision led to one of the most epic intellectual debates in Islamic history, the clash between the Kufa and Basra schools of linguistics.
Oh, this debate is legendary. We have to picture these two environments to understand the debate. Kufa was a vibrant, chaotic, cosmopolitan hub. It was a melting pot of cultures, constantly evolving. Basra, on the other hand, started as a strict military garrison town. It was highly ordered, disciplined, and regimented.
And their environments perfectly mirrored their philosophies on language. The Kufa school believed that language evolved organically. They argued that language is a product of social consensus. People exist, they do things, they create verbs to describe those actions, and then nouns evolve organically from those verbs. It's a sociological, bottom-up view of language.
Right. But Basra took the exact opposite approach. They believed language was fundamentally engineered. It was top-down. They argued that the root of language wasn't the messy, action-oriented verb, but the verbal noun, the master, the abstract concept. For the Basra linguists, language was a pristine mathematical construct where pure abstract concepts birthed specific verbs.
And this sounds like a dry academic debate that only scholars would care about until you look at how it impacted actual real-world law. The text gives this wild example, the hippopotamus dispute.
It's such a great example.
What happens when you encounter an animal that breaks your linguistic rules? So, there's a creature that the ancient Arabs encountered and named the water pig, which we know as the hippopotamus. The critical legal question arose for the jurists. Is this animal permissible to eat?
Now watch how the linguistic philosophy dictates the law. If you follow the Basra school, the engineered, mathematical, literal approach, which heavily influenced the Shafi'i school of law, you look at the words. The words are water pig. The word pig is explicitly present. Pigs are strictly forbidden.
Therefore,
by mathematical linguistic deduction, the hippopotamus is forbidden. The engineered definition of the word is absolute.
but if you follow the Kufa school, the organic social approach, which influenced Abu Hanifa and the Hanafi school of law, you ask a totally different question. You ask, what does society actually mean when they use this word? Society knows a hippopotamus isn't literally a farm pig that wandered into a river. They know it's a massive aquatic animal.
Right, they just call it a water pig because it's bulky and wallows in mud.
Exactly. Because society considers it an aquatic animal, a fish of sorts in their broad categorization, it is legally permissible to eat. Your entire legal reality, what you can and cannot do, changes entirely based on whether you think language is an organic social construct or a divine mathematical equation.
And it was into this intense intellectual environment that a monumental figure emerged, Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi. He was a genius who leaned heavily into the mathematical, engineered view of language from Basra. He created a colossal 7-volume dictionary called Kitab al-Ain.
But calling it a dictionary almost does it a disservice.
Totally. He didn't just list words alphabetically. He attempted to map the entire genetic code of the Arabic language. He realized that because Arabic words are built on 3-letter roots, you can treat them like mathematical variables. Let's take the root letters for writing. KTB Farhidi said, let's calculate all the possible permutations of these 3 letters.
Look, a combination log.
Exactly. KTB, KBT, BTK, BTK2, TKB, TBK. That's 6 possible combinations. He would then look at the language of the pure desert Arabs and see which of those 6 combinations were actually actively used.
And here is the genius insight that changes everything. He argued that if you take all the used permutations of those 3 root letters, despite having different specific meanings, they will all share a subtle underlying emotional or conceptual vibe. If you find that shared emotional resonance across all the combinations, you find the primordial meaning of the word. But honestly, this sounds like math, not language. Does this mathematical formula actually apply to the emotional, spiritual concepts in the text? Can you really math your way to the emotional truth of God?
I know it sounds impossible, but that is exactly the challenge we are going to walk through right now. We are going to take the mathematical combinatorial method of Khalil ibn Ahad and apply it to the most profound, emotionally charged word in the entire language, the word Allah, which is derived from the root Allah. We are going to break down the permutations of its root letters, essentially H, V, L, and their vowel variations, to uncover its primordial emotional DNA.
Let's do it. I want to go through these permutations slowly because seeing the psychology behind these ancient roots is astounding. The first root combination is Hevel. What is the emotional core of Hevel?
Hevel translates to a very specific, complex kind of fear. It is not the sudden panic of being chased by a predator. It is fear from an unknown source. It's the anxiety you feel when you are in the presence of immense power, but you don't fully understand its direction or intent.
Like a child's fear of the dark. You aren't afraid of the absence of light. You're afraid of the infinite possibilities hidden within the dark that you can't see.
Exactly. But it isn't just about monsters or the dark. Hevel also describes a terrifying, mesmerizing beauty. Think of a masterfully crafted sword or a beautifully engraved firearm. When you hold it, it is objectively stunningly beautiful. It draws your eye.
But you are acutely, nervously aware that you are holding an instrument of death.
Right. It commands a fear that is inextricably intertwined with awe. Or think of the classic literary trope of a woman whose beauty is so striking, so overwhelming, that it inspires both profound love and a paralyzing fear of losing one's heart. It's beauty with incredibly high stakes.
Okay, so we have terrifying beauty. Keep that tension in mind. Now we shift the letters to the next permutation. Lev.
Yeah.
The emotional tone shifts dramatically here. Lev means joy, play, and a desire that completely captivates you.
It's the feeling of being in a state of flow, when you are so entirely absorbed in something that brings you delight, a piece of music, a passionate conversation, a game that you lose track of time. You forget your worries. You are captivated by joy.
So we have mesmerizing, terrifying beauty, and we have captivating joy. The third root permutation is a Vela. Vela takes that captivation and pushes it to its absolute limit. It describes a kind of madness.
A madness.
Yeah, it is the overwhelming, all-consuming passion of losing one's mind over a lost loved one. It's an emotional intensity that completely overrides human logic. But paradoxically, it also describes a specific environmental phenomenon. Vel is the word used for a sudden desert wind that fills your chest with an inexplicable, overwhelming surge of joy.
Wow, a breathtaking rush of emotion that hits you out of nowhere.
Then we move to the fourth root, hail. This one is highly visual and quiet. Hail is the word for the captivating halo of light you sometimes see around the moon on a clear night.
It's distant, it's radiant, and it's deeply moving to look at. It inspires a quiet, profound awe. You can't touch the moon's halo. You can't capture it, but you can't look away from it either. It demands a serene respect. Finally, the fifth root brings all of this cosmic and overwhelming emotion crashing back down to earth into pure, grounded intimacy. Ale. We hear this constantly in the common Arabic greeting, Ahlan wa sahlan. Ale means your most beloved people. It means your family.
It means the ones who make you feel completely, utterly safe. When you open your door to a guest and say, Ahlan, you are telling them, you have entered a sanctuary, you are among family, you have absolutely nothing to fear here. It is the ultimate linguistic expression of safety and belonging.
Now, step back and look at the mathematical synthesis of all these permutations. We have fear of the unknown, terrifying beauty, captivating joy, overwhelming passion, distant radiant awe, and the ultimate feeling of familial safety. When you pour all those incredibly potent emotional ingredients into a crucible and fuse them together, you get the final root, Allah, from which the name Allah is derived.
So the primordial DNA of the divine name is a mixture of profound love, the deep fear of losing that love, utter paralyzing respect, and absolute unconditional safety.
And there is a vivid metaphor from the text used to capture this exact emotional cocktail, the grand synthesis. Imagine you are walking in the deep desert and you encounter a specific type of viper. But this snake is breathtakingly beautiful. Its scales are covered in intricate, mesmerizing, jewel-like patterns.
Okay.
When a small animal, its prey, sees the snake, it doesn't immediately turn and run in panic. It is literally paralyzed by the awe of the snake's beauty. It stands there, completely captivated, staring at the terrifying beauty until the snake strikes.
The awe overrides the survival instinct. That is the primordial emotion encoded into the very mathematics of the word Allah. It completely destroys the cynical idea of a dictator in the sky who demands blind obedience purely out of the threat of hellfire.
It totally reframes it.
The linguistic root proves that the ultimate reference point is a reality so overwhelmingly beautiful, so deeply loving, and so awe-inspiring that human beings are drawn to worship it out of pure, paralyzing love.
It is a surrender to ultimate beauty, not a surrender to a tyrant. And this linguistic reality perfectly explains a crucial structural choice in the Quran. Out of all the 99 names, the two names placed at the very beginning of the text, in the opening phrase recited by billions of people every day, are Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim.
The endlessly loving, the endlessly merciful.
The core, the gateway to the divine, is love.
Okay. We have zoomed incredibly far inward today. We started at the biological limits of human hearing, we journeyed into the three-letter mathematical roots of ancient desert language, and we explored the internal microscopic psychology of awe. Now, to truly wrap up this deep dive and grasp the scale of what we were talking about, we had to zoom all the way out, as far out as the human mind can possibly comprehend.
We need to look at the cosmic rosary. The text mentions that the number 99, as in the 99 names, is not meant to be a strict mathematical ceiling. In classical Arabic linguistic tradition, saying 99 was a way of expressing infinity. It represents boundlessness. To illustrate this boundless scale, the text uses a breathtaking astrophysical metaphor. Imagine the entire visible universe as a tesbih, a prayer rosary.
If you were listening to this right now, I want you to really try to visualize this. Think of a standard wooden rosary you might hold in the palm of your hand. Now replace those small wooden beads. The beads on this cosmic rosary are not made of wood. They are the 400 billion galaxies in the known observable universe.
400 billion.
Each single bead is an entire galaxy containing hundreds of billions of suns and solar systems stretching across what might be a holographic multiverse. So I ask you, if the universe is a rosary of 400 billion spinning galaxies, who is pulling the beads?
When a human being sits in silence and truly comprehends this scale, when you feel the weight of 400 billion galaxies, and then you realize that the force pulling those colossal celestial bodies through the infinite void of space is the exact same force we just defined linguistically as paralyzing love and ultimate safety, your entire perception of reality has to shift.
You literally cannot look at a stone on the ground or a tree or another human being the same way again.
You can't. The universe ceases to be a collection of cold, dead, random matter colliding in the dark. It becomes an open, living, intentional book. Every leaf falling from a tree, every star burning in the night sky, every mundane, frustrating interaction you have in traffic becomes a teacher.
It's all part of the curriculum.
It is all part of a deliberate curriculum designed by that ultimate, loving reference point.
What an incredible journey we've been on today. Just to briefly recap, we started in the desert with Abu Bakr's lost camel halter, realizing that divine formulas provide the ultimate operating system for the human mind, allowing us to navigate chaos. We explored the terrifying madness of limitless hearing and X-ray sight, discovering that our biological and conceptual boundaries are actually a profound mercy.
We saw how a society without those boundaries falls into the void of valuelessness. We broke down the tautology of life, living to work, working to live, and found that only a transcendent reference point can give our actions ultimate meaning.
We unpacked the ancient mathematical permutations of Kufa and Basra to find that the linguistic root of the divine name is a paralyzing, beautiful love. And finally, we zoomed out to see 400 billion galaxies spinning on a cosmic string of mercy.
And there is one final, incredibly beautiful linguistic detail from the text that ties all of this together perfectly. We established that all the adjectives, the merciful, the knowing, the forgiving, point back to the heart, which is the name Allah. But what does the name Allah point to? Because ultimately, even a name is a conceptual boundary. A name is a limit used for human understanding.
So what lies beyond the name? What does it actually point to?
It points to the ultimate pronoun. In Arabic, it is hu. It translates simply to he, or more accurately, the absolute. It is the total stripping away of all titles, all descriptions, all attributes, and all boundaries. When you strip away everything your limited human brain thinks it knows, you are left only with the pure, unadulterated essence of existence itself. Hu.
Whew. The absolute essence. You navigate your entire day relying on boundaries. You rely on the physical limits of your eyes and ears just to stay sane. You rely on the boundaries of your vocabulary to communicate your feelings. You rely on the ethical boundaries of society to feel safe walking down the street. But today, I want to leave you with a challenge. Take a moment later today to look at something completely, entirely ordinary. Look at a tree outside your office window. Look at your coffee cup on your desk. Look up at the sky and ask yourself, if I stripped away my own ego, if I stripped away all the boundaries, definitions, and labels my human brain forces onto the world, what is this object actually trying to teach me about the who? What is it saying about the ultimate reality behind it? Maybe if we quiet down enough and listen past the terrifying noise of our own limitations, we might finally hear the silence of what the spinning earth is trying to tell us. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Welcome to The Critique. Today we're analyzing a theological submission spanning revelation, moral boundaries, and a deep linguistic analysis of the divine name Allah. We're going to dive right into the structure because the jump from societal collapse to sensory biology needs immediate attention.
Yeah, that's exactly where we need to start, because when you're dealing with a text that moves from sociology to sensory biology to ancient linguistics, the connective tissue has to do a tremendous amount of heavy lifting.
Right. So a key theme running through this material seems to be the absolute necessity of limits and frameworks for human understanding and society. But the transition between contemporary socio-political commentary and abstract physical concepts creates a disjointed experience for the reader.
Oh, absolutely. The weakness here is that the narrative jumps abruptly from discussing the Martin tragedy.
Exactly. This whole general value crisis, and then it goes straight into the mathematical limits of human hearing and sight.
Like the 20 decibel limit, right?
Yeah, or, how the visual spectrum is missing 95% of light frequencies. There's just no clear narrative link to guide the reader there.
It feels like the author is building this massive bridge between physical reality and moral reality, but the planks connecting these two sides are currently a bit loose.
I completely agree. So my suggestion is to explicitly use the concept of boundaries as the central thematic anchor that directly connects societal decay, sensory limitations, and divine structure.
Okay, I like that. Do you have some concrete examples of how they could do that?
Sure. The author could bridge the socio-political section and the sensory limits section by explicitly stating something like, just as our eyes are protected by only seeing a fraction of the light spectrum,
Which prevents us from seeing through each other like an X-ray.
Right, exactly. They could say society is protected by moral boundaries in that exact same way. When those boundaries are destroyed without a divine replacement, we get societal chaos.
That single sentence changes everything. Another concrete example would be to move the discussion of a value crisis closer to the segment about Allah being the ultimate reference point.
Yeah, thereby unifying the physical and moral arguments seamlessly, rather than treating them as isolated islands of thought.
It just manages the reader's cognitive load so much better. I mean, academic audiences might understand the individual concepts, but they shouldn't have to play detective to figure out the narrative structure.
Exactly. A complex idea delivered clearly is always more powerful than a complex idea delivered opaquely. We want the reader spending their mental energy contemplating the profound philosophical weight of the text, not trying to figure out why we are talking about decibels.
That's a really solid point. And it becomes even more crucial as we move into the next phase of the material. Once we establish a smoother thematic transition into the linguistic and historical analysis, we need to evaluate how much historical detail is necessary to keep the reader engaged.
Because right now, there's a lot of it.
Oh, so much. Let's look closely at the section discussing the methodology of Arabic root words. The text dives deeply into the historical debates between the Basra and Kufa linguistic schools.
Yeah, and the categorization of words by early linguists like Khalil bin Ahmed.
Right, and the exact 6-way permutations of Arabic verbs.
but the extensive historical dive into linguistic methodology dilutes the central focus on the etymology of the divine name itself.
It really does. Because the weakness here is that spending considerable time on the debate over the literal versus canonical meaning of the water pig.
Wait, the water pig?
Yeah, it's basically the hippopotamus.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah, so spending all that time there or detailing how words are categorized into used and unused terms by ancient scholars, it just stalls the narrative momentum right before reaching the climax of the piece regarding the roots of the word Allah.
Well, I appreciate the scholarly thoroughness. My concern is that giving the listener this level of detail is like showing them the entire blueprint of an engine when they just want to know how the car drives.
That is a perfect analogy. Is there a risk that focusing solely on these historical linguistic debates might overlook the actual emotional weight of the theological message? Because right now, that is exactly what is happening.
The momentum completely stalls. I spent 10 minutes reading about Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Shafi'i debating nominal categories of hippopotamuses.
Right, and by the time you actually got to the revelation of the divine name, you were probably exhausted.
I almost forgot why we were talking about linguistics in the first place.
So, the suggestion here is to condense the linguistic history into a streamlined foundation that serves strictly to validate and introduce the primary argument about the divine name.
Absolutely. What would be some concrete examples for doing that? Do we just take a red pen and cross out the entire section on the Kufa school?
Not necessarily. Instead of detailing the full digression on the Kufa versus Basra schools, the author might briefly summarize that Arabic uniquely preserves its root meanings through a strict mathematical system.
Yeah, just as categorized by early linguists.
Exactly. From there, they could move swiftly to the core permutations that actually build the divine name.
Or, alternatively, they could place the heavier linguistic debates into a footnote or a separate appendix, ensuring the main text remains tightly focused on the spiritual impacts of the words.
I really like that approach. It honors the scholarship without blocking the reader's path. Because an author often falls in love with a piece of research and forces it into the text, even when it actively harms the pacing.
Yeah, you have to kill your darlings sometimes. By trimming the linguistic tangents, we clear the path to the true heart of the text.
Which brings us to the breathtaking revelation of what those linguistic roots actually mean.
Right. So after the linguistic foundation is set, the text reveals that all the root permutations associated with the word Allah ultimately converge on the concepts of love, awe, and sanctuary.
Words denoting a mix of awe and fear. Words meaning magnetic love and attraction.
Yeah, even words describing losing one's mind over a lost loved one. Okay, so what I really like about this part is how it reframes a dry linguistic root into a deeply emotional and original revelation.
It fundamentally shatters the conventional dictionary definition of a name. It proves that the divine name is woven entirely from a dual thread of awe-inspiring fear and deeply consuming love.
But the profound revelation that the linguistic roots of the divine name are woven entirely from concepts of love, awe, and sanctuary is buried at the end and requires earlier integration.
Yeah, that's definitely the weakness here. The text treats this deeply emotional, original insight almost like a concluding dictionary definition, rather than the thematic climax it deserves to be.
Right, forcing the listener to wade through logistical details before hitting the emotional payoff. It's as if the text hides its absolute greatest treasure at the very bottom of the chest. I want to push back and ask if we shouldn't put this jewel right on the lid.
Building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of narrative foreshadowing?
Oh, I see where you're going.
Yeah. The suggestion here is to foreshadow this linguistic duality of fear and love much earlier in the text, using it as an emotional lens through which the rest of the material is viewed.
That would change everything. The reader wouldn't just be wading through data, they'd be anticipating a massive emotional thesis.
Exactly. So, for concrete examples, the author could introduce the metaphor of the desert snake in the very beginning when first discussing how humans interact with the divine.
Oh, the creature that's so beautiful, it paralyzes the viewer with both fear and admiration?
Yes, that exact one. It's a perfect visual representation of those Arabic root words. But currently, that metaphor is also buried deep in the text.
Bringing that to the front gives the reader a visceral visual anchor right from page 1. Are there other concrete examples of where they could pull this forward?
Yeah, definitely. When discussing the biological limits of human smell, and the philosophical idea of how a sin or a good deed might smell, the author could tie it directly to the Arabic root for worshipping out of deep love.
Wow. So you aren't just talking about the biology of the nose, you were talking about the biology of worship.
Exactly. These are just a couple of ways to pull the emotional weight forward, making the final linguistic breakdown feel like an inevitable, satisfying resolution.
It just creates a cohesive, unified theory. The reader experiences the text not as a series of disconnected academic lectures, but as a single, expanding realization.
Right. The raw material here is undeniably strong. The philosophical depth and the sheer scale of the research are impressive. The issues aren't with the facts themselves, but with how those facts are sequenced and delivered.
Yeah, the structural engineering of the narrative just needs recalibration. Let's do a quick recap. To summarize, our critique focuses on 3 main areas.
Right. First, utilizing the concept of boundaries as a thematic bridge between the socio-political and the physical observations. This prevents that cognitive whiplash.
Second, condensing the historical linguistic tangents to maintain narrative focus. Moving the jurisprudential debates and the water pig tangents to the footnotes will prevent the momentum from stalling.
And third, front-loading the beautiful, emotional etymology of the divine name so it frames the entire piece. Moving the desert snake metaphor to the introduction gives the reader an emotional anchor throughout the denser sections.
We highly invite the listener to apply these actionable suggestions and submit their revised work back in for another round of feedback. Thanks for tuning in to this critique, and keep refining your work.
Welcome to the debate. I want you to imagine waking up tomorrow morning, walking into your kitchen, and realizing your vision has suddenly been upgraded by 400%.
Okay, wow. Sounds intense.
Yeah, at first maybe it sounds like a superpower, right? You think you'd see the world more beautifully with, I don't know, deeper colors and sharper edges. But then you look across the breakfast table at your family, and instead of seeing their faces, your expanded visual spectrum cuts straight through their skin.
Oh, God. That's a horrifying image.
Right? You see their pulsing veins, their muscle tissue, just the horrific machinery of their biology like a walking X-ray. Instantly, normal human connection is destroyed. You can't look your spouse in the eye because you literally can't even see their eyes anymore.
It is a profoundly disturbing image, and it completely flips our usual assumption on its head, doesn't it? The modern assumption that more data, more perception, and fewer boundaries inevitably equal a better, more enlightened existence.
Exactly. Today we are examining a deeply intricate philosophical framework drawn primarily from Islamic theology and the historical engineering of Arabic linguistics that asks a really terrifying question. Are our biological and intellectual limits a flaw, or are they a divine spacesuit keeping us sane?
It's a massive question.
It really is. So we are looking at 2 opposing lenses for human flourishing today. I'll be representing the perspective that the text fundamentally champions the mercy of limitation. The idea that strict structural, sensory, and linguistic boundaries are the essential framework for all meaning and safety.
And I'll be representing the opposing perspective, that the text's ultimate thesis is about transcending those limitations, achieving transcendent surrender to connect with an absolute referent, rooted in awe and, well, a boundary-shattering kind of love.
To really ground this, I think we have to start with the biology, because this philosophy doesn't just live in the abstract realm of metaphysics. It relies on striking physical realities to prove that meaning fundamentally requires borders. I mean, to understand anything is to limit it.
Which brings us back to that visual spectrum.
Right. Our eyes only perceive a tiny band of light, less than 5% of the actual spectrum, nestled right in this incredibly narrow pocket between infrared and ultraviolet. If that boundary shifts even slightly, reality becomes completely unlivable.
And it scales to all our senses. I mean, the auditory limits are just as jarring when you really think about them.
They are terrifying. Human hearing has a hard cap at a 20 decibel lower limit. Why? Because if we could hear at 0 decibels, we would be constantly assaulted by the microscopic reality buzzing around us. You wouldn't be able to sleep.
You'd just be laying there.
Yeah, you'd lay your head on your pillow and be deafened by the sound of the microorganisms living in the fabric. You would hear the 2 billion microbes currently living on your own lip. And if we lacked an upper auditory limit, we'd be subjected to the roaring, mechanical grinding of the Earth's rotation.
Which is just unfathomable.
Exactly. These limits aren't evolutionary accidents or flaws. Within this framework, they are a profound divine mercy. A structured, heavily bounded framework is the highest good, because without the walls, the noise of the universe literally crushes your mind.
I see exactly why that physical evidence is so compelling. But I come at it from a different way. I look at those physical limits, the 5% visual spectrum, the 20 decibel hearing threshold, and I see a starting point, not a destination.
Okay, but they literally keep you alive.
They keep the biological organism alive, yes. But existing merely to stay alive is intellectually empty. In logical terms, it's a tautology.
A self-referential loop?
Precisely. Imagine asking someone why they go to work and they say, to earn money. You ask why they need money and they say, to buy food. You ask why they need food and they say, to stay alive. And why stay alive? So I can go to work.
Right, it just circles back.
It is a closed, bounded circle that signifies nothing outside of itself. This theological framework makes a totally uncompromising assertion. It says he who has no Allah has no meaning. A purely bounded system without an ultimate transcendent referent is meaningless.
So you're saying the limit isn't enough on its own?
Exactly. The highest state of human flourishing isn't just safely dwelling within our little 5% visual bubble. It's stepping outside of the I consciousness. If the end goal was simply to exist safely behind our biological walls, the theology wouldn't demand such radical, ego-destroying surrender.
I hear that, but if human behavior and human meaning require a connection to the absolute, how does that connection actually manifest? It manifests through structure. Let's look at how this applies to society and revelation.
Oh, this is where it gets controversial.
Well, yeah, the Quran itself is an incredible example of limitation. It is not an infinite library. It provides a highly bounded framework, just over 6,200 verses. It doesn't offer an infinite number of specific solutions to an infinite number of historical problems.
Right. It isn't an encyclopedia that has an entry for every possible dilemma you might face in the 21st century.
Exactly. There's this famous historical metaphor about Abu Bakr, the first caliph, who purportedly said that if he lost his camel's halter, he would look for it in the Quran. Now, obviously, he didn't mean he would flip open the text and find a verse saying, your camel's halter is under the palm tree on the left.
Obviously not.
What it means is that Revelation provides the strict syntax, the specific limits for how to use human reason to solve the problem. The 6,200 verses form a bounded formula for navigating reality. And when you scale this logic up to society, you hit a very provocative conclusion about the modern crisis of valuelessness.
And this is where the argument gets really uncomfortable for a modern audience.
It is incredibly counterintuitive to the modern secular ear. The argument is essentially that absolute valuelessness, a society entirely without borders where all subjective truths are valid, is so structurally destructive that even a flawed, rigid boundary is functionally better.
Better in what sense?
In the sense of psychological stability. The framework suggests that even an oppressive feudal tradition, or literally bowing down and worshiping a stone, provides more stability than having no absolute values at all.
Come on.
Hear me out. If you worship a stone, you can at least say, the stone commands me not to steal. You have a framework. You have lines you cannot cross. The chaos of the infinite is so dangerous that any border is better than no border.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the ultimate message here is an endorsement of any random border just for the sake of order. That's a compelling sociological argument for keeping a population in line, maybe. But it completely ignores the mechanism of how revelation is actually described as working.
How so? It establishes clear laws and moral limits.
It does, but look at the imagery used to describe its impact. It doesn't say revelation builds a nice, safe fence around the human heart. It uses incredibly intimate, almost violent, boundary-breaking language. It says revelation puts its fingers into the hearts of men.
But it's still guiding them.
It physically moves them from one existential state to another, achieving transformations that even parents cannot achieve with their own children. That isn't the action of a static boundary. That is a transcendent intervention shattering the old self.
I would argue that transformation is still directing them into a new, highly specific behavioral framework, though.
Yes, but the power that gives the framework meaning isn't the wall itself. The power is the transcendent referent. Going back to your point about stone worship, saying that bowing to a rock is better than modern valuelessness, I agree that valuelessness is presented as the ultimate tragedy, but the rigid boundaries of feudalism or idolatry aren't presented as functional solutions.
They're presented as better than the alternative.
They are presented as symptoms of humanity desperately, pathetically trying to manufacture meaning when the absolute referent is missing. A stone provides a boundary, sure, but it's a false one. It's a placebo. The true mechanism for human flourishing isn't just installing any boundary to keep the panic at bay. It's the specific, radical surrender to the ultimate reality.
That's a fascinating interpretation. But if we want to test whether this worldview inherently favors fluid surrender or rigid structure, we really have to examine the very tool it uses to conceptualize reality, the Arabic language itself.
Ah, you're talking about the linguistic engineering of the roots.
Yes. If human society needs strict borders to prevent collapse, what about the machinery of human thought? The historical analysis of Arabic morphology here is mind-blowing. Let's look at the Basra School of Grammar. They did not view language as some organic, chaotic evolution of grunts that eventually turned into poetry.
No, they certainly didn't.
They viewed it as a mathematically engineered product. Every core meaning in the language is tightly locked inside a three-letter root system, the Sulasi Mujarrat.
The permutations of consonants. It's incredibly rigorous.
It is essentially a mathematical matrix. Take Khalil bin Ahmed al-Farahidi and his monumental 8th century dictionary, the Kitab al-Ain. He didn't just walk around writing down words people were using, he mathematically categorized every possible permutation of the Arabic alphabet to determine the absolute boundaries of meaning.
Let's make this concrete for people.
Sure, take the root letters K, L, and M. The mathematical root maps to the concept of impact or striking.
Which seems pretty abstract until you see the words it generates.
Exactly. From KLM, you get the word kulm, which means a physical wound, but you also get the word kalima, which means a spoken word. Why are speech and physical injury locked inside the exact same three-letter boundary? Because words leave a psychological impact. They strike the listener. The meaning is fixed by the root.
It is a beautiful system.
It is. Let me offer a modern analogy. These structural roots of Arabic, as conceptualized by the Basra school, operate exactly like a highly regulated computer coding language. Think of C++ or Rust. In those coding languages, you have strict syntax and explicit memory boundaries. They are heavily enforced to prevent the entire operating system from crashing.
Right.
If you try to declare a variable outside of its bounded scope, the compiler rejects it immediately. The argument here is that human meaning must have this strict syntax. The linguistic boundaries aren't just cultural flavor, they are the structural integrity of reality. Without the mathematical limits of the roots, meaning crashes.
I love the coding analogy. It perfectly captures the Basra school's ambition. But a compiler only works in a perfectly closed digital environment. Reality is not a closed digital environment.
Well, it's the closest model we have. Is it?
The linguistic tradition itself actually acknowledges this tension, which is why the opposing faction, the Kufa school, is so crucial to this debate.
The Kufa scholars were much more focused on colloquial usage. I'll give you that.
Right. They believed language evolved from verbs through social consensus, not a pre-existing mathematical matrix. That implies a much more organic, fluid, and entirely less rigid origin of meaning. It suggests that humans interact with the chaotic vastness of reality first, and the boundaries of language form as a secondary, imperfect consequence. The mathematical absolute is an illusion we project onto the chaos to feel safe.
But the mathematical elegance of al-Farahidi's system is what historically dominated the structural understanding of the language.
It dominated the theory, yes, but it constantly failed in practice, because reality is too strange. Remember the great historical, legal, and linguistic disagreement over the sea pig? The hippopotamus.
Ah, yes, the taxonomy debate.
It's a perfect example of the system crashing. You have this highly engineered linguistic and legal code. Is a hippopotamus a pig, and therefore its meat is strictly forbidden, or is it a sea creature and therefore permissible?
It definitely broke their categories.
Completely. The fact that the most highly trained scholars, armed with their perfect three-letter roots and strict legal syntax, couldn't agree on how to categorize this animal proves a fatal flaw in the structuralist argument. Strict linguistic boundaries fail when they encounter the infinite, bizarre variety of actual creation. A hippopotamus doesn't care about your three-letter root system. The boundary fails and you are forced to deal with the reality that exists outside the lines.
It is a fair critique of human categorization, I'll admit. The CPIG definitely breaks the compiler. But even if our human boundaries are sometimes flawed, the ultimate referent, the divine reality you keep pointing to, is still expressed and understood through this very language. Which brings us to what I think is the climax of this whole conceptual tension, the etymology of the word Allah itself.
Yes. And this is where I believe the argument for transcendent surrender undeniably overtakes the argument for structural limitation. If boundaries, order, and mathematical precision are the highest ultimate good, then the central word of this entire theological universe should represent pristine order. It should derive from a root that means the organizer, or the architect, or the great boundary maker.
But what does the etymological deep dive actually reveal?
It explores a few different roots, primarily focusing on the emotional weight of them.
It's way beyond emotional. The root words, WLH and HWL, do not signify safe, comfortable boundaries. They signify absolute terror. They signify a love so profoundly overwhelming that it literally causes a person to lose their mind. The conceptual roots are hevel, which describes the visceral, paralyzing terror of facing an unknown infinite threat, and vele, which is the state of going mad from love.
Right. This is not the language of a neat, mathematical C++ coding system. This is the language of a catastrophic system overload.
I will grant you that it is an intense etymology. It paints a picture of a reality that is far from safe.
Intense is an understatement. Think of the specific wild metaphor used to illustrate this in the text. The Atatat desert snake. Have you ever heard of a biological creature described this way?
It's a very unique parable.
The observer encounters the snake in the desert, and it is so unbelievably beautiful, adorned with such mesmerizing, jewel-like patterns, that the human being is completely paralyzed by awe. They cannot run away. They cannot process the sensory input. And because they are frozen by this overwhelming, contradictory beauty and terror, they simply die.
It's a striking image. That is the mechanism the text uses to explain the roots of the divine name. The absolute center of this worldview isn't a wall that protects you. It isn't a neat three-letter root. It is a reality that shatters your boundaries entirely through an overwhelming, paralyzing mix of terror and love.
I have to pause there because while I agree with the etymological facts you're laying out, I am completely unconvinced by the conclusion you're drawing from them. You are misinterpreting the function of the awe. You're entirely right that the roots signify terror, mind-losing love, and the absolute shattering of the ego, but that overwhelming, lethal awe is exactly why the structural boundaries exist in the first place.
Wait, how does that follow? If the ultimate, truest reality is this boundary-shattering awe, then the boundaries are just illusions we construct because we're cowards. They're meant to be discarded.
Space is the ultimate vast reality of our physical universe. It is infinitely beautiful and infinitely terrifying.
Sure, but you can't survive it.
Exactly. If you step out of an airlock into the vacuum of space without a spacesuit, you don't achieve some grand cosmic enlightenment. You don't merge with the universe. Your blood boils, your lungs collapse, and you die.
Right?
The physical and conceptual limits we've been discussing, the 5% visual spectrum that keeps us from seeing X-rays, the 20 decibel hearing threshold that silences the microbes, the mathematically engineered roots of the Arabic language, the 6,200 verses of Revelation, they are the components of the spacesuit.
So you're saying the terror of the absolute actually necessitates the mercy of the limit. The limit isn't a prison, it's a life support system.
Earth's rotation. There's that incredible haunting anecdote mentioned about the woman who purportedly went mad 50 years ago because she somehow lost her auditory boundary and could hear the rotation of the Earth.
Yeah, that story was wild.
She experienced just a tiny fraction of the absolute reality of planetary mechanics, and it completely destroyed her mind. Just like the observer of the Atat snake is destroyed by unfiltered beauty. Without the spacesuit of biological, linguistic, and theological limits, humanity is obliterated by the sheer magnitude of reality.
I see.
This philosophical framework isn't telling us to bravely take the spacesuit off, it's telling us to be profoundly, humbly grateful for it. We can intellectually acknowledge the infinite terror and love of the absolute, but we only survive and we only flourish because of the mercy of limitation.
That is a masterful synthesis. The spacesuit metaphor perfectly crystallizes the tension here. I completely concede that the suit is what keeps the biological and psychological organism intact. But I have to push back on what the ultimate goal of wearing the suit is.
Which is what?
I would argue that while the spacesuit keeps you alive in the physical realm, the entire purpose of the theology, the real mechanism of flourishing, is to remind you that you are not the suit. The framework explicitly states, "Yakun nolana yaklaşmak kendine yaklaşmak lazımdır." To approach the one who is near, you must be near to yourself, which fundamentally means you must exit your own ego. Senden çıkacaksın. You will step out of yourself.
But exiting your ego doesn't mean taking off the physical suit.
You may be forced to wear the spacesuit of physical limitations in this temporal life, sure, but the theology demands that your soul surrenders to the vacuum. The ultimate trajectory pulls human consciousness past its own limits. If you spend your whole life just maintaining the oxygen levels in your suit, never looking out the visor at the terrifying beauty of the stars, you have missed the entire point to the expedition.
Which brings us to a very natural place to summarize our distinct perspectives on this incredibly dense material. Throughout our discussion today, I've maintained that this worldview is fundamentally a masterclass in structuralism. It demonstrates by weaving together biology, sociology, and the intense mathematical engineering of Arabic morphology that boundaries are a divine mercy.
Right.
We are finite creatures built to process an overwhelming, terrifying universe through a very narrow, highly structured bandwidth. And that limitation, that spacesuit, is the only thing that makes meaning, sanity, and human flourishing possible.
And I have maintained that while those protective boundaries undeniably exist and shape our daily reality, the ultimate gravity of this philosophy pulls the human soul past them. By defining a life without an absolute reference as a meaningless tautological loop, and by tracing the very name of the divine to linguistic roots of terror, awe, and mind-shattering love, it demands the surrender of the ego. The boundaries keep the organism alive, but it is only the transcendent reality beyond those walls that gives that life any actual value.
It really is a profound intellectual tightrope. The way it weaves the rigorous, almost cold mathematical engineering of linguistic roots together with deeply mystical, dangerous concepts of divine awe is incredibly rare. It flatly refuses to let the reader settle comfortably into just pure, neat rationalism or just pure, chaotic mysticism.
It forces a constant tension. You have the boss for school calculating root permutations like a supercomputer on one side, and the Atat snake paralyzing you with lethal beauty on the other. It's a powerful reminder of the value of considering both the intricate, necessary structure of our limits and the incomprehensible vastness of what lies beyond them.
As we wrap up today, we aren't going to declare a winner between the mercy of limitation and transcendent surrender. The framework itself seems to balance them on a knife's edge, requiring both to function. But I want to leave you with the jarring image we started with.
Ah, yes, the 400% visual upgrade.
Yes. Imagine, again, that your eyes are suddenly expanded to see all of reality. You look down at your own hands, and instead of familiar skin, you see the complex, terrifying machinery of your own biology. The atomic structure vibrating, the sheer weight of existence stripped of its filters. You are seeing more truth, more pure reality than you ever have before.
Which is both beautiful and horrifying.
Exactly. The question this philosophical exploration leaves us with is this. In that moment of overwhelming, terrifying clarity, are you saved by the fact that you have the structural limitation to eventually close your eyes, or are you saved by what that terrifying light reveals?